If you could only sign one player to the Atlanta Braves roster for 2025, seems pretty obvious to me which position they'd play. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Thursday, January 9th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. Tons of ways to support the show. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. If you have comments for us, you can leave them in the comments down below on YouTube. You can send them to me on Twitter. You can email us, contact@bravestoday.com. That started to pick up a little bit as people have lots of thoughts about the Atlanta Braves. You can also subscribe to the newsletter. We have both free and paid options there. And as we get closer and closer to pitchers and catchers reporting, the Braves have not done much, right? They have signed a couple players to minor league or non-guaranteed deals, right? They got a 40-man roster spot, but their salary is not guaranteed unless they make the opening day roster. Carlos D. Rodriguez, Brian De La Cruz, a couple different pitchers. They traded for Davis Daniel, but for the most part, Atlanta's seen a bunch of guys leave. And we think it's because they're going to reset the CBT. And they very well may do that, right? This is not the show where we're going to break down the pros and cons of doing that. But it did lead me to start thinking, if you were going to sign one player, just one, who is available in free agency right now, who would it be and why? Because there's four real needs for the Atlanta Braves, right? When you look at this by... no matter how you look at it, right? You look at it by WAR, you look at it by who departed in free agency. Your four positions for an upgrade, we've beat this into the ground at this point in the offseason. Starting pitcher, relief pitcher, shortstop, left field. And shortstop and left field, you are very obvious because of just significant underperformance last year. Atlanta's WAR from shortstop was minus 1.5. It was 27th in baseball. Left field, negative 2.1. That was 26th in baseball. Coincidentally, the next lowest spot was 1.8, negative 1.8 in right field. But you're going to get Ronald Acuna Jr. back some point in time in the first half of the year. And when you're trying to figure out which of these is the most important, I do think injury returns as well as free agency departures play a role in this, because every position has been impacted in different ways. The outfield, right? You're going to get Ronald Acuna Jr. back. We don't know exactly when. We're thinking sometime around the 6-week mark of the season, but we don't know. I do find it interesting that Eno Saris of The Athletic wrote an article about the top 15 holes on contending teams, and the Atlanta Braves left field slot was not mentioned in there. Now, we were tweeting back and forth. I got a little context on that. It turns out that the reason that he didn't include left field was because he was taking the corner outfield into account and then dividing by 2, and in this case, Ronald coming back in right field offset the projections of Kelenic and Brian De La Cruz. But still, there were multiple other positions on contenders that were a bigger problem than the Braves out in left field. The Phillies in corner outfield were the worst of all 15 that he looked at. The Mets are on there for center field. You look at other contenders, the Cubs are on there for first base. The Red Sox were on there twice, and pretty important positions, catcher and shortstop. Cubs also had relief pitcher on there, right? The Royals were on there for corner outfield and center field, so that's every single outfield spot. The Mariners were on there for first and third base. Like, a lot of teams that are contenders have multiple holes. And Atlanta did not have a single one on there. But for me, despite how they performed last year, I would look at adding a reliever if I could add just one position. So for context, Atlanta's relievers last year, 3.9 WAR, that was second best in baseball. And Cleveland's bullpen was nuts, 7.5 WAR. They doubled up everybody but Atlanta in WAR. Just absolutely absurd what Cleveland's bullpen did. But you saw that workload hit them in the postseason, right? Emmanuel Clase gave up more runs in the postseason than he did in the regular season, right? Or more runs in October, than he gave up in the regular season. And for Atlanta, that bullpen did really well, but AJ Minter is now gone. Jesse Chavez is now gone. And Joe Jimenez is injured, and we talked about in the New Year's resolutions episode, the goal should be to get him back by the trade deadline, but it is entirely possible that Joe Jimenez does not come back at all next year. And so you have lost two of your primary setup men in the back end of the bullpen. So if I'm signing one player to this roster, if you told me this is the roster you get, you can add one player who is currently a free agent. We're not looking at trades right now, just currently a free agent. I think I'm going with a reliever. In all of these categories, I've got a couple different options, right? I've got like the best option out there, the realistic target that's left. I've got a guy who could be like your fallback option, and then I've got a guy who could be a speculative, this could really pay off and get some great value out of this. And if you're looking at relievers, I'm absolutely looking at Tanner Scott. He does a lot of stuff, and signing Tanner Scott, we've talked about this on the show before, but it gives you high velocity, it gives you a lefty, and it gives you a back-end guy. He hits all three of the boxes of it would be nice to get this from the reliever that you sign. You're going to have to check two of those boxes, right? High velocity, a lefty, a back-end guy. You're going to have to check two of those. Tanner Scott can give you all three. And so I think ideally he is the choice of if you could add one player to this roster, Tanner Scott absolutely would end up being that guy. Now, he's obviously not the only option that you would have, but, and we've talked about this before, there's a lot of reasons to really like adding Tanner Scott because, among other things, Raisel Iglesias is going to be a free agent after this year unless you're able to re-sign him. And so Tanner Scott could absolutely just slide into the closer role after 1 year or earlier if there is an injury to Iglesias. Knock on wood, he's not been that injured in his Braves career. He did start 23 on the IL. Minter had to be the closer for a little while, but Tanner Scott could be your starter and your closer in waiting behind Raisel Iglesias. So if I'm adding just one guy, I think I'm adding Tanner Scott. If you don't want to spend that amount of money, because again, we've had this conversation about Atlanta has 20-ish, 22, 23 million to spend while still being able to stay under the CBT and reset the CBT. And you want to save some money for mid-year acquisitions. AA always wants to do that. Alex Anthopoulos is very cognizant of we need to have money available at the deadline to add if we need to. Then I think a good fallback would be AJ Minter. He gives you that back-end experience. I believe he's the organization's leader in holds. He obviously is a lefty. The velocity is not absolutely top tier. He was dealing with the hip a good part of the year last year. He only averaged 94.5 on that, but on his fastball. But as recently as 2023, he was averaging 95.8, and in 2022, he was averaging 96.6. It stands to reason if he can be fully healthy, if he can get back to full health, which we haven't gotten an update on his health status. then being able to add 2 ticks back to that fastball and going from the 94 to the 96 gets you pretty close to that high-octane, hard-throwing guy that we want in the back end as well, and he would also check all 3 boxes. Probably cheaper than Tanner Scott. Do I still think you would look at the market for closers after 2025? I don't think it'd be a slam dunk that AJ Minter would be your closer, but I absolutely think that you would consider it. And then a guy I've talked about before, your speculative pick who would be cheaper, but could potentially, you could easily see a path to outplaying his contract, is Jay Leclerc. I don't know what happened there. It is late on Wednesday night, you guys. I've been a little under the weather as well. So Jose Leclerc, formerly of the Texas Rangers, was the closer, lost the job to Kirby Yates last year. His ERA went from 2.68 in 2023, where he won a World Series, to 4.32. Some of that feels to me like it's a little bit of a reduction in effectiveness of his changeup, as well as just some of the locations and things like that on his fastball. And it's funny, the fastball, as far as batting average allowed and things like that, actually did better. It went from a 209 batting average to a 176. But a lot of the ancillary stuff dropped off. His slider didn't do as well. His cutter didn't do as well. His changeup did significantly worse. So I think it's still just temporary stuff. I think you can fix it. And if you can fix it, you can possibly get a closer for 2026. He'll be entering his age 32 season for 36. He's 31 now. So you'd be able to get him for a couple years, probably a little bit cheaper because of the bad year he had. And even though through the bad year he had with an ERA of 4, he still had top tier whiff rates and strikeout rates, was very good at not allowing hard contact. It's just most of it he allowed was in the air, and that's really where he got damaged. His expected ERA was only 3.59. And again, that's with the performance of his off-speed kind of cratering from a run value perspective. And then both his slider and his cutter taking a step back in actual performance and how much they got hit. Not hit hard, just hit in general. In just a second, if you didn't sign a relief pitcher, who would you sign? What position would it be? Let's talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about if the Atlanta Braves could only sign one player this offseason, which, spoiler alert, it feels like if we get a signing, we're only going to get one signing. But if you could only get one player, who would it be? What position would they play? And I do think relief pitcher is probably the number one area to address, simply because you're missing so much out of your back end. And do you have guys who are great? Dylan Lee, Aaron Bummer. I think both those guys are great. Yes, you do. But adding another high leverage option would be great, because one injury and you're now in trouble. Another area where an injury can really cause you some trouble is in your starting rotation. This is a situation, your starters last year are some of the best in baseball. 8.6 WAR from starters was third best in baseball. You beat everybody else, right? You beat Philly. You beat the Yankees, all of these good teams. You beat all of these good teams. You beat the Dodgers. They were negative, by the way, in starting pitching, but you did lose 2 significant members of that rotation in Max Fried and Charlie Morton. Fried's now with the Yankees. They were, I think, top 10 in WAR at like 3.8, and they're bringing just about everybody back except for Nestor Cortez, who got traded. And you lost Charlie Morton to Baltimore, who was positive, like 1.2 WAR, but I think most of that was Corbin Burns. Baltimore's still in trouble. I really don't think they've done nearly enough to not waste the prime of Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson, the cheap, cost-controlled years. But if you're going to sign a starter, same thing. We've got 3 tiers here of the different guys it could be. And I'm trying to be realistic on this. So I'm not including guys with qualifying offers. Alex Anthopoulos has gone on the record as saying the Braves don't want to lose draft picks to sign a qualifying offer player. He has done it before. He signed Will Smith entering 2021 and got a World Series out of it. So arguably it worked. But they did give up a draft pick to sign Will Smith. If you were to sign a qualifying offer player now, you would lose 2 draft picks, your second and your 5th highest pick, as well as $1 million from your international bonus pool, which we have a big J15 class coming up. I mentioned that on Tuesday's show. We're going to cover that in a couple as we get closer to it. We'll probably also bring you video of the press conference posted to the channel when we get to talk with Atlanta's international scouting folks after they sign that class. That's always something that the Braves set up for us. I usually record those press conferences and I'll bring it to you. I'll post it to the channel and then we'll probably talk about it on the next episode, which would be that Monday. But I think in this situation, if you're ruling out qualifying offer guys, so no Nick Pivetta, right? Everybody else, for the most part, is gone already, right? They've already been signed. I think the pretty consensus thing here is going to be Jack Flaherty. And there is a history between the Atlanta Braves and Jack Flaherty. We put out a graphic the other day with a prediction from Jim Bowden of The Athletic saying the Braves signed Jack Flaherty. And we talked about how did you feel about his comments. He hit Ronald Acuna Jr. in a playoff game. The Cardinals were winning. He later tweeted mocking Ronald Acuna Jr. He retweeted a tweet from MLB mocking Ronald and all of that stuff. Most responses that we got to that tweet and that Facebook post said you guys would be willing to move on from a lot of that if Jack Flaherty wanted to come here. Last season between Detroit and LA, 3.17 ERA in 28 starts, 162 innings. He went 13-7, struck out 194 batters, so 10.8 strikeouts per 9. He was phenomenal in Detroit. 7-5, 2.95 ERA, 11.2 strikeouts per 9. Took a step back with LA. Some of that was workload. He got worn down the stretch in 23, coming back from injury, through 144 innings, but those last 7 starts with Baltimore were atrocious. So the workload caught up to him a little bit again this year. He went from 140 to 160 something, plus the postseason. He did go on the IL a little bit as well. If he's healthy, if the medicals worked out, I do think Jack Flaherty is one of those few guys left on the market that you would be comfortable starting in a postseason game. A lot of people, when we talked about this the other day with Jordan Montgomery, said they didn't love a lot of the overperformance of the expected stats from Jordan Montgomery, which honestly, 100% I buy that. That is my goal for this show would be people to be able to look at something and say, hey, it's a good idea. These expected stats, like he had a lot of overperformance and he's bound to regress a little bit. That's what I want from this show. I want smart and educated fans, and I feel like y'all are some of the smartest and educated viewers that I could possibly ask for, so thank you. If Jack Flaherty was not in the cards, it gets really tough to find another guy, because I don't know. Like, Justin Verlander, to me, would have been the short-term deal you could have worked out and tried to do for a guy that, if he's healthy and pitching like he's capable of, you could have thrown in the postseason. Of the guys who are left from this list, I don't know who would be a postseason starter. Is Max Scherzer going into his age 41 season? Is Max Scherzer where he could be a postseason starter for you? He threw to a 377 in 2023 between the Mets and the Rangers. He threw to a 395 last year, but he only had 43 1/3 innings. If you signed Max Scherzer, what kind of length could he give you? And would he be good enough to pitch in the postseason? We don't know. Andrew Heaney is another name out there, a veteran who could be your new Charlie Morton, who you could sign in he's 33 right now, so you'd get him into the middle and back half of his 30s if you wanted to bring him in for a year and then sign him for a couple years. But last year, he was 5-14 with a 4.28 ERA. Now, their offense struggled. He was 10-6 in 2023 with a 4.15 ERA. So It's not like the offense, or it's not like his numbers were that much worse. Strikeout rate ticked down a little bit, but his walk rate also ticked down. His home run rate ticked down as well, but he got less wins because the offense was worse. That's totally familiar to Braves fans. We dealt with that last year too. He's probably a guy who you're probably not starting him in the postseason. He did have an ERA of 3 and change with LA in 2022. He's now 2 years and would be 3 years removed from that when next season comes around. He did make 1 start and 2 appearances in the World Series against the Diamondbacks in 2023 with a 1.59 ERA. 1 run, 2 walks, 3 strikeouts, and 5 2/3 innings in the World Series. So you like that. Question would be, is he ready to get back to that point? I don't know. He's probably one of those, if you were missing some guys and you were deciding on who would be a postseason starter. Last year, we had to decide Bryce Elder or A.J. Smith-Shawver for Game 1. I think this would be A.J. Smith-Shawver, Andrew Heaney for Game 1. Who's available? Who would we rather throw? The speculative pick here that you could get a great value on if everything worked out is Jeff Hoffman. Another reliever that teams are looking to convert to starter, just like Clay Holmes. I do think it would be a deal like Ronaldo Lopez signed, maybe a little bit more expensive. But one of the common trends that we've seen with some of these deals recently has been the player opt-out. If he moves to starting and looks really good, the common thing to do now is to give that guy an opt-out so he can go back into the free agent market. Obviously, Atlanta doesn't do opt-outs. We had somebody on YouTube the other day said that he had a source that said Tanner Scott was signing a 4-year deal with Atlanta with an opt-out after the second season. And I think that's how we all knew he was full of crap, because AA does not give out opt-outs. That's not a thing that he does. He doesn't do opt-outs. He doesn't do player options. He doesn't do mutual options. He doesn't do vesting options. It's a club option or nothing. So Jeff Hoffman would be a speculative pick to be a guy that you could bring on. He could start for you. If that didn't work out, you could move him back to the bullpen, and he could be one of those back-end setup guys for you. And if the deal was similar to Ronaldo Lopez's deal, then it's not a crippling amount of money to throw in your pen. The Phillies are dealing with that right now. Taijuan Walker is in their bullpen, or finished the year in their bullpen, and he's making $18 million. Like, it's crippling just about for Philly. Jeff Hoffman doesn't project to make the contract that would be in that situation. In just a minute, let's talk about the position players. If you could add just one, would it be a left fielder or a shortstop? We'll break that down next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today, final segment where we're talking about if the Atlanta Braves could only sign one player, which kind of feels like that's what they're going towards anyway. If the Braves could only sign one player, what would it be? I made the case for a reliever. I do still think that would be the best way to go if you're only signing one free agent. Outside of that, we looked at starter. I do think that left field and shortstop, I'm going to group them together because, like I mentioned earlier in the show, both of them didn't produce that well from a WAR perspective last year, right? Again, shortstop, negative 1.5 WAR, 27th in baseball. Left field, negative 2.1 WAR, 26th in baseball. But these positions are also in a different dynamic than they were last year, right? In the outfield, all over the outfield, really, not just left field, injuries obviously played a huge factor. You lost Ronald Acuna Jr. You then lost Michael Harris, which meant that your left fielder in Jared Kelenic had to kick over to center for a majority of the season. So even though you didn't suffer an injury, a severe injury to a left fielder, injuries at the other parts of the outfield took your left field options away and made you play a lot of other options in left. If you look at the outfielders that are available now, it's not an amazing group of guys. We've broke down like some of the people that we thought Michael Conforto might have worked. He went to the Dodgers. I think at this point, your top tier option left, again, ignoring guys who have a qualifying offer. So no Anthony Santander, is a guy like Jurickson Profar. And a lot of this, we did this on a show maybe 2 weeks ago. A lot of this comes back to, do you feel like his changes that he made, his mechanical changes and his approach changes that he made for 24, he changed some of his timing mechanisms with the kick versus the tap, the leg kick versus the toe tap. He specifically trained to swing harder, right, to generate more power. If you believe that a lot of those approach and mechanical changes are going to stick, then Jurickson Profar is not as risky of a move as it might feel. He is going to need a multi-year deal, so you do run into a situation where, with Jared Kelenic being around for 4 more years, right, you do have 4 outfielders for 3 spots. Your DH spot will open up after this season, unless Marcell Ozuna is re-signed, so that is always an option there as well. But Jurickson Profar is probably your top tier target. For a fallback option, when you're looking at the outfield, we've gone through a lot of names as who could possibly work. I was talking about Max Kepler. He went to the Phillies. You're in a situation where maybe they take a 1-year flyer on a Tommy Pham. Maybe they go with another veteran, a David Peralta, something like that. This is really tough. There's not a ton of great options out there. Randall Grichuk, Ramon Laureano's still out there. You can bring him back. You could always bring him back for less than you were going to get his arbitration deal for. But I don't really think they go with an outfielder. And shortstop's in a similar situation because the only real guy that should be an upgrade is Ha-Seong Kim. We've talked about this at length. You could platoon Arcia and Paul DeJong and things like that. But really, the only guy who would be an upgrade is Ha-Seong Kim. And there's enough questions about his recovery from the shoulder surgery where it makes it a little bit risky. Whenever a guy has surgery on his shoulder, you obviously worry about arm strength after that. We saw what happened with Marcell Ozuna, who was not great defensively in left, but suffered the arm injury and just had a limp noodle for an arm after that. Now, his arm strength has steadily ticked up the little bit that he's played the outfield in StatCast Parks. We don't have any numbers from last year, but it was slowly getting better as he got farther away from that shoulder surgery. But I think the issue, the risk with Ha-Seong Kim is, let's say he's able to come back after the first 6 weeks of the season, right? But what if his throwing arm is not back yet? Like physically, he can come back. He can hit. He can play defense. But what if his throwing arm isn't yet strong enough after the surgery? You either have to play a defensive shortstop with a lesser arm, which we don't want to jeopardize defense there. That's the big thing for Brian Sitka and this front office is they want a good defensive shortstop. They want good defense up the middle. Sean Murphy, Orlando Arcia, Michael Harris are all good defenders. Do you sign him as a free agent to sit him on the bench because his shoulder's not back yet, his arm strength's not back yet? What if it never comes back? Then you now have a duplicate situation where you have 2 guys, and Ozzie Albies and Ha-Seong Kim, that can really only play second base from an arm strength perspective. So that's the risk with Ha-Seong Kim. Again, I'm not opposed to the signing. I like the idea of having a versatile defender who, when healthy, can be the best defender in the infield at any position he goes to. Again, the issue is, what if his arm strength doesn't come back to the point where you can play him on the left side of the infield? That's the risk here. And ultimately, that risk is why I think Atlanta sits out the shortstop market this year. I don't think they go and they sign anybody. They roll with Orlando Arcia. They know that they have Nick Allen and a bunch of journeymen behind them. And if there is some sort of injury in season, they're not afraid to go out and pick up guys. They've picked up minor league guys. They made a bunch of claims during the season. Zach Short played for us. Joey Wendell played for us. Like, a bunch of dudes played in the middle infield for us last year. They're not afraid to do. They learned how to do it last year, and they'll do it again if they have to. And I think if you sign one player, if you could only sign one player, shortstop's probably last on your list. Simply because there is no slam dunk significant improvement over what you have on the available in free agency. Whereas you can get a slam dunk closer in waiting in Tanner Scott. You can get a pretty good starter in Jack Flaherty. You can even find outfielders who, if you're confident in what they did last year, would be upgrades like Jurickson Profar. Shortstop, you don't have that certainty. So for me, it's probably last on the list. But I want to hear from you. What do you think Atlanta's one signing would be if they could make only one signing? Or if they would actually make a signing, what would it be? I want to hear from you. If you're listening on audio, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. When we drop tomorrow's episode, we'll have a special guest on from outside of the Braves ecosphere talking about how the Braves are perceived outside of Atlanta and outside of our fan base. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.